Long story short, Obsidian's Brandon Adler, he's game director for Outer Worlds 2, said that Outer Worlds 2 isn't going to be a game for everyone and they won't have respec. I don't think they're good enough developers to make this claim. I hope that they can prove me wrong, but I seriously doubt it. I'm going to take their most recent game as an example here. It's Avowed. I don't know if you guys have played this, but it's a very similar type of game to Outer Worlds, so I think we can make some very accurate comparisons between the two. Now, I just want to be clear that this video is not meant to be a critique of Avowed directly. I'm just talking about the systems related to the comment from Adler about respec not being necessary in their game. And I will admit that some of the things I'm going to talk about here have been patched or changed. This is no longer assuredly representative of the current game of Avowed, but it was how the game started, and it was how the game was when I played it. So it was like this at release, and then they later made changes to it. We're going to talk about attributes, skills, and equipment. So I started the game on the hardest difficulty. It's called Path of the Damned. And enemies literally one or two shot you. They hit you a couple times, you're dead. You had to dodge or block everything. Dodging and blocking took stamina, but so did attacking. So right out of the gate, stamina was easily the best stat that I wanted to get. I put a few points into resolve, which is going to be the stamina stat, but I also wanted to play as a wizard, which seemed to lean towards things like intelligence and maybe perception. Intelligence gives you more essence, so you can cast more skills. Essence is the resource you use for things like casting skills or spells. And I wanted perception because it said it gave critical strike chance, okay? So that was the way I wanted to play. So I put some points into perception for the crit. Made sense. But as I'm playing, about 10 hours go by, and I start to notice a horrifying trend. My spells aren't critting. Ever. And this isn't listed anywhere in the game. Spells do not crit. So there is no reason to spec into perception at all as a spellcaster. And this is when I really started to take a step back and analyze all the attributes and get a better look at them now that I understood the game a little bit better. So Might increases damage and carry capacity. In a lot of RPGs, carry capacity is incredibly strong because it lets you carry more gear or weapons on you while still being able to take loot while you're adventuring. This means that you can have some adaptability in and outside of combat because you can swap the equipment that you have in your inventory. And it saves you a lot of time with having to go back to places for loot because you can carry all the stuff out of there. But in this game, you can instantly, from anywhere, deposit all of your loot into the infinite space stash that's at camp. So this makes the carry capacity completely worthless. The attribute of Might is damage only. Intellect increases your maximum essence. And like we said before, that's the stat that is used to determine whether you can use a skill or a spell. It's the resource. Now, that sounds like it'd be incredibly important for somebody like me that wants to play a wizard. But the casting in this game works completely differently than most games. It's got a cost reduction mechanic that's similar to Skyrim. You know, the armor that says, like, your spells are reduced magicka cost of X amount. Well, in this game, it does something similar, but instead of reducing the cost of the spell, it refunds it after you cast it. So if a spell costs 100, but you have 90% reduction, it'll spend the 100, and then it'll refund 90 of it. So even though the spell effectively costs 10, you can't cast it anymore because you don't have the initial amount necessary prior to the refund. So, intelligence is terrible. Dexterity increases your weapon swap speed. And at first this sounds fine, because we're talking about the adaptability with the carry capacity, things like that. But it's useless when you realize how the equipment works in this game. So, remember this one, because we're going to come back to it here in a bit. Later in the game, your companions offer to train you. They say something like, I could teach you some of my skills if you want. And you could decide, teach me to hit hard, or teach me to be tough, or teach me a little bit of both. It's essentially some form of that dialogue, depending on which companion you're talking to. Now, the first time you encounter this, you may not know what it means. It's going to provide you with some sort of passive, maybe an active. You're not really sure what this means that it's going to do. It ends up giving you an attribute boost based on what you pick, but there's no way you can know that for certain at the time you pick it. Honestly, this really can't hurt you because they're just free stats, but the first one you get is universally good across the board. It's might or it's constitution, which is basically just translatable to it either gives you damage or it gives you health. This is probably the best example of their proposed system where respecking isn't important, because even if you don't really understand what this choice means, whichever one you pick is really going to benefit you no matter what. There's really no way increased damage is going to hurt your build. There's really no way increased health is going to hurt your build, right? But the thing is, imagine if the first companion that gave you this had perception and might as the stats it gave. Well, if I were a wizard and I picked perception and didn't realize that it actually didn't affect me, I would be furious that I couldn't change this. This would be an infuriating moment in the game for me. Now, I will admit that this one worked out, but I'm just putting the point here that they are on the precipice of making this into an extremely frustrating system. Let's talk about the skills. So I immediately noticed that I was taking an immense amount of damage. Obviously, I'm playing on the hardest difficulty, but the damage is coming from ranged attacks, archers and the like. While you're fighting one character, off in the distance, there's some archer just shooting arrows at you non-stop. So I looked through the skill tree, and right at the top of the wizard skill tree is a skill called Arcane Veil. And the Veil skill prevented any damage from ranged projectiles at all, just completely stopped it. And it reduced all damage taken by 50%. 50. This reduction is so strong, it's stronger than any armor in the game, even heavy armor. So as a wizard, I was immediately tankier than the best heavy armor tanks. I used this skill on cooldown for the entire 60-hour playthrough of that game. So as you run around, you can find grimoires, which are basically your spell books, which is a pretty cool mechanic. It puts some of your actual talented skill spells into a book. And if you have this book equipped, what makes it cool is you can then cast this spell even if you don't have it talented. So at some points you might want this utility, you could switch to a different book and cast the spell. Now the problem here is that if you have a book, for instance, that has a spell in it that you already have, such as Fireball, it will actually increase the rank of that skill one higher than what you have it. So if you have 1 point in Fireball in your skill tree, and then you find a grimoire that has Fireball in it, you will now cast a level 2 Fireball instead of a level 1 Fireball. That's great. But the problem here is if you have the points to take Fireball to level 3, and then you find a grimoire that casts the Fireball as well, it doesn't do anything past level 3. So you're encouraged by this mechanic to only take your spells to level 2, and then use a grimoire to take it to level 3, which is the max level. So, do you even know if you're going to find a grimoire, because they're not customizable, that has the spells that you want? So you want to take some spells to 3, because maybe you can't find a grimoire that has that spell. But you also want to take some only to 2, because you're going to use a grimoire with it. But there's no way for you to know that at the time, because the game doesn't tell you this ahead of time. So if you level Fireball up, and then you get a grimoire with Fireball, you just wasted a point. So there was no reason for you to take that all the way up there. And if there was no respec here, this would be a nightmare. The game is incredibly stingy with skill points. Every skill tree for the 3 different types, there's basically warrior, rogue, and mage archetypes, right? And each one of the skills in there have multiple levels and ranks that they can have. There's passives and actives. There's a lot to pick from, I'm not gonna lie. But the problem is the game only gives you like 30 skill points, and there's probably 300 total to pick from. You can barely make a build. And especially when we're talking about this kind of thing where you need the grimoire, and you're gonna level some stuff up, there's just no room to experiment with combinations at all. And here's the funny part. Skills are unlocked at certain levels. This is not a surprise if you've ever played any sort of RPG. You have some skills that are like open at level 1, you got some skills that are open at level 5, whatever. But the thing with the skills in this game is that they made it to where when you respec, which maybe this is why they want to change the respec, It doesn't matter how many skill points you have spent in the tree whenever you go to take the skill. All that matters is what level you are. So once you hit level 15, you could click the respec button, and you can take all of your skill points and put every single one of them into the level 15 skills. You could take 0 of the lower level skills if you wanted. You could just put it all into the high level skills. Now, many games circumvent this problem or address it by making it to where you have to spend X number of points prior in the tree in order to get to the deeper talents. But this game, Avowed, just doesn't do it. You can just respec and dump your points right into the level 15 row, dump your points right into the higher level row. I don't know why they did that, but it just makes lower level skills completely obsolete. Completely. If they didn't do this, though, you would just waste the points on the lower level skills, because a lot of them, especially under the wizard tree, are almost one-to-one analogs of something that's better. There's like weak fire, strongest fire. That's it. So if you want to cast fire spells and you took the weak fire spell, it's just getting replaced with the stronger fire spell when you get there, and you just wasted those points. Now let's talk about equipment. So weapon upgrades in this game were extremely expensive, and they were handled in the most ridiculous way. Quests dropped upgrade materials based on the highest level item that you had. So it was incredibly important to level your weapons and armor up as soon as possible. However, even with the increased drop quality that you would get by doing that, you didn't have enough materials to experiment with other weapons, because you needed to keep funneling it into your highest level item to make sure that the later stuff would continue dropping better and better stuff. And let's say I wanted to upgrade my wand, which is what I started out with. I was like, oh, I'm going to upgrade the wand. But later, I wanted to do a gun. Okay, let's switch to a gun. Well, unfortunately, there's no reasonable way to do this, because it would cost me so many upgrade materials to upgrade that gun to the same level as the wand that I would just be wasting any materials on the gun, which would then set back the level of the wand. Now, I would just completely kneecap my progression later in the game because I stunted the growth of my weapon. Now, they had a weapon swap mechanic. Remember when we talked about dexterity earlier? Dexterity makes it to where you swap weapons faster. But that sounds cool. Well, what did we just talk about? You can't really level up a second weapon. You gotta dump all your stats into your primary weapon. So, yeah, you could switch to the second weapon and use that. Okay, I know what some of you are thinking. Not a big deal, dude. All you gotta do is switch to the other weapon whenever you need some sort of utility that it can provide, right? Well, here's the thing. Almost all the weapons in the game were pretty bare bones. They just didn't have a whole lot of utility going on with them. They did some additional electricity damage, something like that, but nothing that would really do anything, because let's say your weapon had increased electricity buildup, and you're like, okay, I'm going to switch to my secondary wand and shock this enemy. There was just no way that was going to happen, because the way the game worked was enemies scaled just incredibly based on the equipment that you had. So if you had let's say, we're just going to use a simple term here, they had a weapon tiering system. So if there was like a tier 3 weapon and a tier 3 enemy, it would seem like a rather normal fight. But if it was a tier 3 enemy and you had a tier 2 weapon, this was an impossibly long, epic fight. We're talking like 5 minutes of you non-stop dodging, perfect dodging. Your damage is reduced by like 95%. I'm not even exaggerating. You were doing so little damage against these guys. They would one-shot you with every ability. Almost every enemy in the game summons a ton of adds. You were just surrounded by bullets and projectiles coming from every direction. So there was no reasonable way you were going to fight somebody that had a higher level on their equipment than you did. And because of that, there's no way you're going to be able to switch to a second weapon and make it effective in combat at all. My secondary weapons throughout the entire game, their only purpose was out of combat stuff. I would use them for doing things like breaking crates or solving puzzles. That was it. I never used my secondary items in combat. There was no reason to. So this weapon swap mechanic that's on dexterity is completely worthless. So thankfully, this game did have respec. And so although it has its fair share of issues, the thing is, you can now sweep some of this stuff under the rug. Because if it doesn't work out the way you thought it did, you could just hit the respec button. You don't feel like you wasted your time, which is a huge factor here. It's about the consideration of my time. I'm not asking Obsidian to make a perfect game. I'm just asking them to understand that they can make mistakes and give me an out if they do. Now, if they want to make a perfect game, that's great. But I think that even one of these examples is proof enough that they don't understand how tight their design needs to be to give up respec. And holy cow, I just went through a whole list of problems that they had.